GDM versus JDM. When I talk about GDM, it simply means German domestic market, and JDM is Japanese domestic market. Understand one thing about GDM. GDM under this category, I'll not talk about cars that have been manufactured in Germany, but cars that have been manufactured from Europe in general. Germany is in Europe, so is Britain, so is France. So GDM will just generalize the European cars. When I talk about JDM, I'll just not categorize on the cars that have been made in Japan. I'll talk about cars that have been made in Thailand and South Korea, right? So I just wanted to clarify that out. So I want us to talk in detail comparing the two types of cars. We'll highlight on their pros and we also look on their cons. When we consider both the pros and cons, we'll come to a conclusive decision about the car that we should go for as a car owner. And when you're talking about these two groups, when I talk about the GDM, I'll consider a car like a BMW. And when you talk about the JDM, I'll take a car like a Toyota. Let's start first by understanding the GDM, and we'll start by talking about the pros. So when you talk about the GDM, the pros, the first pro is what we call safety. Safety, I mean that this car is well engineered to ensure that when you're riding in that car, inside that car, your safety is a priority. When you look at most GDMs, and this one will be specific to the BMW. First of all, their crumple zones are well designed. When you talk about the crumple zones, they are well designed such that in case of an impact, they crumple perfectly as they should, protecting you inside the passenger cell. When you're protected inside the passenger cell, it just means that the walls around you will crumble, but no harm will get to you. Another thing that they highly consider on is something we call anti-collision sensors. Anti-collision sensors are the ones that are responsible for sensing when a collision has happened, when your car has maybe hit on a tree or a car has rammed into another car and all that. Anti-collision sensors, they are very accurate. So when you talk about accurate anti-collision sensors, they also enhance your safety as a car owner inside the passenger cell. Another thing is more airbags. When you compare the GDMs versus the JDMs, you'll find that the German domestic market has heavily invested in multiple airbags. You've got airbags that are protecting your chest. You've got side airbags, which you call curtain airbags. We've got knee airbags that are supposed to protect your knees in case there's a head-on collision, such that you don't break your kneecaps and everything. They've really enhanced and ensured that there are multiple airbags ensuring your safety when you're inside the passenger cell. Now, on to the pro number 2 is something we call performance. When you talk about performance, and in the case of the BMW, when we talk about speed, this car really performs on the road. It has good response. When you press on the accelerator, it responds very quickly, ensuring that it's really doing nice speeds when you're driving on the highways. Another thing about performance is something we call Valvetronic. The BMWs have a Valvetronic system, and the advantage of this Valvetronic system is it controls air intake. In most cars or in the JDM's counterpart, they've got a throttle body, and the throttle body opens and closes depending on how hard you accelerate on the accelerator. But now when we talk about Valvetronic system, the throttle body is always open. So when it's always open, it's the work of the valves to regulate the amount of air that is getting into the combustion chamber. So yes, it gives a very good response to the car and it really performs well. So it performs well because there's faster response and at the same time, the air intake system is well articulated. Another thing on performance is something we call complex suspension, which leads to what we call stability. The BMW has a very complex suspension, which is well engineered to ensure that the car is really stable on the road. What I mean by stability is one thing. Maybe the cars may be lowered to lower the COG, but when it comes to handling of corners, they have a mechanism whereby if maybe this is a car and this is a corner, they break the inner wheels. All right? The car is moving forward, there's a corner, these inner wheels they get some braking, and it ensures that the outer wheels negotiate the corner easily and efficiently, so it enhances on the stability. Another pro for the GDMs is something we call, now let me not write down here. Let me come and just write it up here. Number 3 is what we call luxury. Luxury, I mean the likes of heated seats, massage seats. When you look at maybe how the seats are well designed, they're luxurious and really comfortable. That is something that the GDMs have really nurtured on. They've really capitalized on them. And by luxury, I don't mean spacious. No, 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 no. I mean the amenities that when you sit inside that car, it just feels wow. Now, we've highlighted on the pros, and that is safety, that is performance, and there is luxury. Let's look at the cons. When you talk about the cons, this is the downside of the GDMs, or the German domestic market. And the first con is what we call, let me just finish clearing this out. Let's look at the cons. Now, the first con of GDMs is what we call poor resale value. And by poor resale value, I mean that these cars, once you've owned this car, trying to dispose it off becomes a hassle. Why is that so? Let's take, for instance, a BMW X6. Anyone who wants to go for a BMW X6, they will always consider importing a car from abroad other than buying a locally used unit. So when they import new cars from abroad, it means that the cars that are already in the market, they don't have prospective buyers. When they don't have prospective buyers, they result into poor resale value. All right, so poor resale value is because the demand is less. When demand is less, it means that poor resale value. Now, the second con is something we call expensive. Not just expensive, not just in terms of repair, but also in initial cost. When you look at most of my videos, I always tend to bend towards a car that is cheap or affordable. But when you talk about BMWs, they're expensive, not just in terms of initial cost, but also in terms of maintenance cost. And now when they're expensive, it simply means that they're now left for a specific group of people, or people who are at least have a strong financial muscle to ensure that they can buy the GDMs and also sustain the GDMs. All right, now let's go to con number 3, and that is unreliability. Understand one thing, I've highlighted the 3 factors that the GDMs have really capitalized on, and that is on safety, performance, and luxury. Now, when you talk about performance, for a car to perform as it should, it goes without saying that the car has been over-engineered. When a car has been over-engineered, it means that there are so many components that have been integrated to ensure that that car performs as it's expected of. So once the over-engineering comes in and a lot of components have been brought in together, then the likelihood of something breaking is very high. And now, when components fail, they lead to what we call unreliability. And now, when unreliability comes into play, then this turns into a car that you cannot depend on. You cannot count on it because it's making more trips to the garage than how often you're using it as a car owner going about your daily activities. So that's it for the cons of the German domestic market. We've got poor resale value. That is because anyone who's going for a GDM, they prefer importing. Not just when you're initially buying, but even for the spare parts. When you talk about spare parts, they'll prefer importing them. Now, if you want to buy maybe you want to source the parts locally, it becomes quite a hassle. You cannot find the spare parts. And if you're finding them, very few suppliers have them. And when few suppliers have them, then if you did business, you know about the supply demand. When the supply is less and the demand is high, the price goes up. That is the case with the GDMs being expensive. Very few suppliers have the spare parts, so when you go sourcing for the spare parts, the price is ridiculously high, resulting into the car resulting into the maintenance cost being high. Also, unreliability, and that is because of over-engineering. Now, let's look at the JDM. We've concluded on the GDMs. Now, let's analyze the Japan domestic market. So now let's look onto the JDM and look at the pros. let's look at the pros of Japan domestic market. The first pro or the first advantage is what we call affordability. Affordability in terms of initial cost and also maintenance cost. Affordability, I can simply say that I can just say it's cheap. And what I mean by cheap, it is in terms of initial cost and also maintenance cost. Now, when I talk about maintenance cost, I always like to maybe categorize it in terms of availability of spare parts. When you look at a car like a Toyota, let me just use the Toyota. Toyotas have well penetrated into the market. When a car has well penetrated into the market, then there are so many units of them in the local market. That means availability of spare parts is very easy. Understand one thing, some of the used spare parts that we source from our local market, some of them have not been imported. Maybe a car got involved in an accident and then the car parts were salvaged and now they are being resold as used spare parts. So many of them. That means spare parts is never an issue. Sourcing of spare parts is never an issue. Another thing, when you talk about maintenance, when you talk about Toyota cars and maintenance, most mechanics know how to go around they know their way around fixing Toyota cars. So when there's a lot of labor force available for the repair of Toyota cars, then also the repair costs go down. When you look at the BMWs, we have very few technicians. You cannot compare the BMW technicians to Toyota technicians that we have in our local industry. And the local industry, I mean the Kenyan market. When you look at the technicians, the BMW technicians versus the Toyota technicians, BMW technicians are really less. And now when technicians are less, then demand versus supply. There's a lot of demand and less supply. That means the maintenance cost will definitely go high when you talk about the GDMs. But when you talk about the Toyotas, the JDMs, the repair costs are very minimal. Now let's look at pro number 2, and that is what we call reliability. Toyotas are very simple cars. What do I mean by simple? They don't have complex systems, they don't have complex suspensions, they don't have complex air intake systems, they don't have complex maybe exhaust systems and how they go about the production of power. They are very simple. Now, when they are simple, then it means that very few parts have been integrated together. And now, the fewer the parts, the less the likelihood of something breaking, resulting to reliability. Simplicity is ultimate sophistication. Someone once said that. So yes, when we talk about Toyota, the fact that they are simple, the fact that they are designed in a very simplistic way ensures or promotes their reliability. Now, when you talk about number 3 is resale value, good resale value. The reason as to why we have a good resale value for the Toyotas is because the demand is high. And when we have high demand, then it goes without saying that the resale value is good. When you look at the Toyota cars we have on our roads, then I'm telling you, there are many. That is why I think even Toyota adopted the slogan that the car in front is always a Toyota. That is because the Toyotas have thoroughly and completely penetrated into the market. And now when they've penetrated into the market, then the resale value is good because the demand is high. That is it when you talk about the pros of JDM, specifically Toyota. First of all, they're affordable, they're cheap in terms of initial cost and also maintenance cost. Then number 2, they're reliable. They're reliable because they're simple, as in they're not over-engineered. Then number 3, they've got a good resale value because their demand is very high in the market. Now, let's look at the cons. When you look at the cons, these are the disadvantages of the Toyota or the Japanese domestic market cars. When you talk about the cons, number 1 is reduced safety. When I talk about reduced safety, When you compare the number of airbags that we have in a Premio versus the number of airbags we have in a BMW, I'm telling you the difference is alarming. In a BMW, they have got lots and lots of airbags compared to a Toyota Premio. So in case of a crash, then the safety that you're ensured when you're driving a Premio is not the same level of safety you're ensured when you're driving a BMW. Number two is what we call reduced performance. Understand one thing, Toyotas are not over engineered, so they don't have the capability of handling top-notch performance the same way the BMW does it. So when you look at the Toyota in terms of performance, there's reduced performance. And anyone who's going for a Toyota, they're going for a Toyota, for a car that can move them from point A to point B economically, and not for a car that moves them from point A to point B in style. Now, on to the third con, that is what we call most of the Toyotas are less luxurious. By less luxurious, I mean that they don't come with over the top kind of maybe luxury things in the car like heated seats, massage seats, or maybe really comfortable seats and all. No, Toyotas are really plain. They're simple in how they're designed. And so when it comes to luxury, they don't offer the same luxury that the BMWs can offer. Now, we've already highlighted on both the pros and cons of the JDMs and the GDMs. The reason as to why we've highlighted on them is to give you a rough idea of what to expect from each car. For you to choose the type of a car you want to go for, the main factor you need to consider on is finances. Because when you look at the GDMs, I've highlighted on safety, performance, and luxury. And also on their cons, I've highlighted on they're expensive, both to buy and to maintain. So if your finances sit right and you can easily accommodate going for a GDM, then why not? However, if your finances are a bit tight and you're a bit constricted and you just want a car that is very economical, then the JDMs is the way to go. Go for a car that will serve you well. Yes, it will not offer you the luxury, it will not offer you the safety and the performance, but at the end of the day, it will take you from point A to point B economically. So yes, there you have it. And I hope it now gives you a clear view on differentiating between the GDMs and the JDMs. So yeah, thank you so much. And if you've noticed, and if you've not yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, kindly consider subscribing. This is where I share informative and educative car content that is beneficial to you, not just as a car owner, but also a prospective buyer and also a driver. So yeah, consider subscribing.